The capital of Afghanistan is Kabul. The capital of Albania is Tirana. The capital of Algeria is Algiers. The capital of Andorra is Andorra la Vella. The capital of Angola is Luanda. The capital of Antigua and Barbuda is St. John's. The capital of Argentina is Buenos Aires. The capital of Armenia is Yerevan. The capital of Australia is Canberra. The capital of Austria is Vienna. The capital of Azerbaijan is Baku. The capital of Bahamas is Nassau. The capital of Bahrain is Manama. The capital of Bangladesh is Dhaka. The capital of Barbados is Bridgetown. The capital of Belarus is Minsk. The capital of Belgium is Brussels. The capital of Belize is Belmopan. The capital of Benin is Porto Novo. The capital of Bhutan is Thimphu. The capital of Bolivia is Sucre. The capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina is Sarajevo. The capital of Botswana is Gaborone. The capital of Brazil is Brasilia. The capital of Brunei is Bandar Seri Begawan. The capital of Bulgaria is Sofia. The capital of Burkina Faso is Ouagadougou. The capital of Burundi is Gitega. The capital of Cabo Verde is Praia. The capital of Cambodia is Phnom Penh. The capital of Cameroon is Yaoundé. The capital of Canada is Ottawa. The capital of Central African Republic is Bangui. The capital of Chad is N'Djamena. The capital of Chile is Santiago. The capital of China is Beijing. The capital of Colombia is Bogota. The capital of Comoros is Moroni. The capital of Congo, Brazzaville, is Brazzaville. The capital of Congo, Kinshasa, is Kinshasa. The capital of Costa Rica is San Jose. The capital of Croatia is Zagreb. The capital of Cuba is Havana. The capital of Cyprus is Nicosia. The capital of Czech Republic is Prague. The capital of Denmark is Copenhagen. The capital of Djibouti is Djibouti. The capital of Dominica is Roseau. The capital of Dominican Republic is Santo Domingo. The capital of East Timor, Timor-Leste, is Dili. The capital of Ecuador is Quito. The capital of Egypt is Cairo. The capital of El Salvador is San Salvador. The capital of Equatorial Guinea is Malabo. The capital of Eritrea is Asmara. The capital of Estonia is Tallinn. The capital of Eswatini is Mbaban. The capital of Ethiopia is Addis Ababa. The capital of Fiji is Suva. The capital of Finland is Helsinki. The capital of France is Paris. The capital of Gabon is Libreville. The capital of Gambia is Banjul. The capital of Georgia is Tbilisi. The capital of Germany is Berlin. The capital of Ghana is Accra. The capital of Greece is Athens. The capital of Grenada is St. George's. The capital of Guatemala is Guatemala City. The capital of Guinea is Conakry. The capital of Guinea-Bissau is Bissau. The capital of Guyana is Georgetown. The capital of Haiti is Port-au-Prince. The capital of Honduras is Tegucigalpa. The capital of Hungary is Budapest. The capital of Iceland is Reykjavik. The capital of India is New Delhi. The capital of Indonesia is Jakarta. The capital of Iran is Tehran. The capital of Iraq is Baghdad. The capital of Ireland is Dublin. The capital of Israel is Jerusalem. The capital of Italy is Rome. The capital of Jamaica is Kingston. The capital of Japan is Tokyo. The capital of Jordan is Amman. The capital of Kazakhstan is Astana, formerly Nur-Sultan. The capital of Kenya is Nairobi. The capital of Kiribati is South Tarawa. The capital of Korea, North is Pyongyang. The capital of Korea, South is Seoul. The capital of Kosovo is Pristina. The capital of Kuwait is Kuwait City. The capital of Kyrgyzstan is Bishkek. The capital of Laos is Vientiane. The capital of Latvia is Riga. The capital of Lebanon is Beirut. The capital of Lesotho is Maseru. The capital of Liberia is Monrovia. The capital of Libya is Tripoli. The capital of Liechtenstein is Vaduz. The capital of Lithuania is Vilnius. The capital of Luxembourg is Luxembourg. The capital of Madagascar is Antananarivo. The capital of Malawi is Lilongwe. The capital of Malaysia is Kuala Lumpur. The capital of Maldives is Male. The capital of Mali is Bamako. The capital of Malta is Valletta. The capital of Marshall Islands is Majuro. The capital of Mauritania is Nouakchott. The capital of Mauritius is Port Louis. The capital of Mexico is Mexico City. The capital of Micronesia is Palika. The capital of Moldova is Chisinau. The capital of Monaco is Monaco. The capital of Mongolia is Ulaanbaatar. The capital of Montenegro is Podgorica. The capital of Morocco is Rabat. The capital of Mozambique is Maputo. The capital of Myanmar, Burma, is Naypyidaw. The capital of Namibia is Windhoek. The capital of Nauru is Yaren, de facto. The capital of Nepal is Kathmandu. The capital of Netherlands is Amsterdam. The capital of New Zealand is Wellington. The capital of Nicaragua is Managua. The capital of Niger is Niamey. The capital of Nigeria is Abuja. The capital of North Macedonia is Skopje. The capital of Norway is Oslo. The capital of Oman is Muscat. The capital of Pakistan is Islamabad. The capital of Palau is Njur-ul-Mud. The capital of Panama is Panama City. The capital of Papua New Guinea is Port Moresby. The capital of Paraguay is Asuncion. The capital of Peru is Lima. The capital of Philippines is Manila. The capital of Poland is Warsaw. The capital of Portugal is Lisbon. The capital of Qatar is Doha. The capital of Romania is Bucharest. The capital of Russia is Moscow. The capital of Rwanda is Kigali. The capital of St. Kitts and Nevis is Basse-Terre. The capital of St. Lucia is Castries. The capital of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is Kingstown. The capital of Samoa is Apia. The capital of San Marino is San Marino. The capital of Sao Tome and Principe is Sao Tome. The capital of Saudi Arabia is Riyadh. The capital of Senegal is Dakar. The capital of Serbia is Belgrade. The capital of Seychelles is Victoria. The capital of Sierra Leone is Freetown. The capital of Singapore is Singapore. The capital of Slovakia is Bratislava. The capital of Slovenia is Ljubljana. The capital of Solomon Islands is Honiara. The capital of Somalia is Mogadishu. The capital of South Africa is Pretoria, administrative, Bloemfontein, judicial, and Cape Town, legislative. The capital of South Sudan is Juba. The capital of Spain is Madrid. The capital of Sri Lanka is Srijawadanepura Kotte, official, Colombo, commercial. The capital of Sudan is Khartoum. The capital of Suriname is Paramaribo. The capital of Sweden is Stockholm. The capital of Switzerland is Bern. The capital of Syria is Damascus. The capital of Taiwan is Taipei. The capital of Tajikistan is Dushanbe. The capital of Tanzania is Dodoma. The capital of Thailand is Bangkok. The capital of Togo is Lomé. The capital of Tonga is Nuku'alofa. The capital of Trinidad and Tobago is Port of Spain. The capital of Tunisia is Tunis. The capital of Turkey is Ankara. The capital of Turkmenistan is Ashgabat. The capital of Tuvalu is Funafuti. The capital of Uganda is Kampala. The capital of Ukraine is Kyiv. The capital of United Arab Emirates is Abu Dhabi. The capital of United Kingdom is London. The capital of United States is Washington, D.C. The capital of Uruguay is Montevideo. The capital of Uzbekistan is Tashkent. The capital of Vanuatu is Port Vila. The capital of Vatican City is Vatican City. The capital of Venezuela is Caracas. The capital of Vietnam is Hanoi. The capital of Yemen is Sanaa.